that's awesome.
We just had Jerry on last show on episode 77, and he was telling us about his ab initio program that he went through. He got hired on at Mesa with 0 hours, and they went through the flight school. Those kind of, from the beginning programs really don't exist anymore. They've progressed into what we now call the cadet program. The cadet program, same thing. If you can apply and get accepted into one of these cadet programs at a legacy carrier, you can, for all intents and purposes, have 0 hours and go through the program, follow their mentorship, their curriculum, their criteria, and get hired on. Now, obviously, FAR 117, in the wake of the Colgan Air crash that happened in Buffalo all those years ago, changed everything. And now we have to have an ATP minimum in order to work at a Part 121 carrier. That's the FAR Part 121 carrier, or airline, U.S. airline carrier. You have to have an ATP rating, regardless of what seat you sit in. But at the time, when you and I, and even Rob, went through the program, we were commercial pilots. That's all you needed to be. That was the minimum, the commercial rating. And a commercial rating with 300 hours and 50 multi got you there. Wow, that's an amazing story. We've seen how the opportunity when you're a low-time pilot to go right from training right into training again without that kind of stagnant period of, I got to build time. And a lot of times what happens, and we didn't really talk about this on the last show, is your instructors, if they're sitting there after a while, if you really don't have a passion for teaching, it becomes kind of tedious. And those instructors lose a little bit of that motivation, and the attitude starts to grow. And then when you show up at a regional airline initial ground school, sometimes it's kind of a shock because you've been out of that mindset of training, or you're receiving the training. And so to go from a training environment, a low time, 300 hours, and then go right into long-term initial ground for an airline, sometimes it's kind of beneficial, wouldn't you say?
I couldn't agree with you more, Tony. At the time, most of my instructors were what you had mentioned. They had been there for years and years. They had accumulated many hours, not because they chose to. They just weren't getting hired at the regionals at the time. Nobody was hiring. So as far as that motivational factor, I did have a couple of encounters in my school where the instructor was kind of checked out and you had to learn on your own. That kind of ended towards the end of my training because the newer instructors were coming in. They were more eager to teach and build time, so that kind of changed. But yes, it was very beneficial. At our school, we did a lot of sim-type work, and I think that gave me an absolute edge over everything. I recall when I went through the training, or when I went through the interview process, for people such as myself that were low time, they would send you through a jet transition course, it was called back then. It was about maybe 10 hours that they purchased. The company paid for it. And I think, and then you had a contract of 2 years. If you left before that, then you kind of had to pay the difference. But I remember the recruiter told me, she's like, the sim, at the time we also did sim rides, and I remember mine was in an ATR when in the evaluation sim ride. I remember the instructor said, the recruiter said, we normally send guys with your experience through this jet transition course. However, we don't think you need it. And I said, well, if you don't think I need it, then I won't take it. She's like, okay, yeah, we'll sign you up for the next class. And I'm like, well, I'll take your recommendation. That was kind of a 2-week thing where you do ground school and a little bit of sim work. And they would sign you off and tell the airline, okay, he's ready and he can go on to this course. Because I recall we had a class of 40, and I recall that nearly half of them did not make it at the end. Some washed out during the ground process, others washed out during the sim process, and a couple washed out in IOE. So it was a very intense. Recall, do you guys remember when we still had the orals and the check rides? I mean, it was really intense at the time.
Yeah. We saw grown men cry because they're like, I just got a pink slip, my career is over. No, you're not. Your career is not over as long as you learn from it and move forward. But still, we've said this 100 times before on the show. It's like, you look to your left, look to your right. One or both of those guys aren't going to make it, and if they make it, you're probably not going to make it. So study up.
Tony, I want to share this. Speaking of a pink slip, at the time when I went through the interview process, my buddy and my school were like, "Oh, don't do it, man. You're so low time. You're gonna wash out, and then you're gonna have pink slip, and no other regional is gonna ever touch you again."
Yeah.
They're like, "You need to go fly, be instructor or go fly somewhere else, get some experience." And I said, "No." She said I could do it, and I'm gonna do it. So I went all in, and luckily it was a positive experience. Now, I don't remember any of it because I was so nervous and everything was just...
It's all a blur.
It's all a blur. I was like, sometimes I wake up and be like, where am I? What am I doing? It was more... And I'm sure you guys know you have the same experience.
Yeah. And Rob did too. We've talked about this before. Tenacity and attitude go a long way. It really
definitely does. Yep.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I think, having that attitude anywhere you go, I'm ready to learn. Please, if I know something and you have a better way of teaching me, please do so. And you find that people do take their time, if you need the extra, time to learn or the extra sim session, and they do help you.
Yeah. They really do. And not, even though, we kind of paint the picture that at the regional airline the training is more difficult, and yes, it is, because it's new. It's a new experience for most people. Now, if you've already been to a regional and then you're coming over from another regional and you're doing a transition, it's no big deal because you've already experienced the initial shock of, oh crap, this is really fast paced, which is really the issue. It's new, it's fast paced, they don't have time to sit there and coddle you and really spoon feed you the answers here. You have to do the work, and it's hard work. It's a lot of information. I mean, how many manuals did we used to carry around in those kit bags? Like 40 pounds worth of books and JEP charts, and you had to know it, or at least have it quickly accessible and know how to find it. So it was a different time. Your tenacity got you through it, and you ended up on the Embraer 145. Was that the first aircraft that you were hired onto?
That is correct. I always tell people that I'm not as smart as I look or I appear. So I think, Tony, you kind of overhyped me there.
Not at all.
But I didn't know regional airplanes existed until I was hired Sandpiper at the time. So I thought they were all made by Boeing or Airbus, to be honest with you. It shows how clueless I was. All I cared was about flying.
I didn't know what an Embraer was when I got there.
Exactly, right.
Yeah,
I had no clue.
Brazil? They make airplanes in Brazil?
Yeah.
What?
Exactly. And
this has a Rolls-Royce motor in it, or
like the car?
Doesn't Boeing make everything, right? So I'm very. I can admit it because a lot of people, I think maybe some of your listeners would go in there and you have a lot of experts that can tell you everything about any type of airplane you ask them for. I don't know. I just know as much as, what I fly right now. I couldn't tell you anything else. But I know going through the aviation program, I had some of my buddies name everything under the sun. And at the time, I didn't even know who made our airplane that I was flying. Later on, I found out it was a Piper Archer. And then I learned about what a Piper was. So... But so that's not to say that, you'll be a failure just because you don't know this information. I think, to me, having the passion of flying goes way beyond the knowledge that you know. I can actually share you a quick story about our hiring process. At the time, when the Sandpiper would hire, they would put you in a room, and kind of all the people that were going to interview that day were in that room. And I was pretty sure that room was being watched or tracked or something. And there was this guy who came in, he did not have a tie on. His shirt was unbuttoned, and he was actually showing some chest hair. And I was like, man, this guy is pretty confident that he's going to get this job. And I remember I was sitting in the desk all scared about, who's going to interview. And at the time, if you guys recall, what they did was they put you in the room and they would call you one by one as they interviewed you. First you did your tech interview, then you did your HR. And if you passed those two, they invite you to do this sim ride in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. So I remember this guy, he sat on the desk, not in the chair, and was swinging his hair, and he was talking about how many hours he had, all the jets he has flown. He's like, yeah, I went to one of those recruiting events, and they said, yeah, we'll hire you right on the spot, but you just need to come to Dallas so you can do the formality of an interview, and, you'll have no problem. I have 3,000 of that. I've flown on this jet. I've flown on that. And I was looking at him. I'm like, how are they going to hire me when this guy, he's the best. This guy is going to get the job. I kid you guys not. They pulled him out first. 2 minutes later, he comes back. And if they tell you, go grab your bags, you're going home. He comes and grabs his bags. And he was the first one to leave. And it goes to show you that the attitude and the bragging and everything and his appearance, they overlooked at all that experience and said, you know what? No, we don't want this guy to be stuck with another guy because it's not going to be good.
Exactly. They teach you this in the private pilot course. I think Principles of Learning, Hazardous Attitudes. One of the first lessons, macho.
Yes.
Your story is right on point. Rob and I are kind of sitting here smiling and laughing as you're telling the story because we've seen it as instructors. We've seen it as check airmen. And unfortunately, this industry, when you have the responsibility of all the lives that you will carry in your career and all of the equipment that you are either responsible for or jointly responsible for as either PIC or second in command SIC, the attitude is everything. And at the end of the day, if you have an FAA license in your back pocket, you can fly an airplane. Okay, you've jumped through the hoops. You've done all the written tests that you can get your hands on to get here. That's fine, but are you going to be a jerk or an a-hole? Am I going to be okay flying with you for a week? That's really when you're interviewed and you get past all those initial hurdles with the HR interview and the technical interview and the sim portion and the medical portion. Somewhere in this interview process, especially at a regional carrier, you're going to be interviewed by an actual line pilot or a check airman. And really what they're looking for, they're going to ask you some technical questions, sure, but that's really their way to judge, are you an a-hole? That's really what it all comes down to. Am I going to be okay flying with you cramped into a phone booth-sized cockpit for a few days? Or am I going to want to kill you after the first 10 minutes because you're driving me nuts?
Yes.
That's really what, something that I wish I knew early on, simply because it would have calmed me down a little bit in the process. And not to follow the status quo, as you didn't. If you would have listened to your peers when you were in training, you probably would have stayed behind, went through the expense of getting your flight instructor ratings and going through building your time, because you had to follow the norm, the status quo. And instead, you listened to your instincts and you thought outside of the box and you weren't going to let, the noise coming from around you dictate your decision-making process. You knew, you had the confidence, and you're humble about it, which again goes to prove that you were doing the right thing and following the right path.